What's up, everyone? It's M4. I'm back with another update on my Hobbit project. So yes, I did finish this over a year ago. Why am I back? Well, I have a few small things that I could actually be introducing into the project here and releasing an update for, because I think some of these ideas are pretty cool. Basically, what happened was I haven't worked on this in a really long time, but there are these small things that I would remember back when I was making this edit that I wish I could have done better, but I just couldn't think of anything else. I really tried my hardest. I tried to be as perfect as possible. Obviously, it's not perfect in the end. It's a fan edit at the end of the day. But now I'm, coming back to the project with a fresh set of eyes. It's been a really long time, and I think that, we could find something cool here to do with this update. And if you watch this video, maybe you'll disagree and think that the original edit was perfectly fine and I'm doing too much. Or maybe you'll think these are cool changes. So it's up to you. You can always keep the old version. We'll see if I release this update. Still considering everything, but I want to just go over all of my potential changes in this video just for fun, for old time's sake. I used to make these videos back in the day. I don't know really how many people are going to watch, but we'll see. So if we look at the full edit in its entirety, I think all the music transitions are as perfect as possible. Some of them are passable. They're not, 100% seamless, but everything is passable in terms of the music, in my opinion. But I do think that in terms of like visual flow or like just following the plot, there could be a few things tidied up, some continuity, and it's just a result of me chopping the footage so much and completely altering the plot that there's a few little gaps, you could say. So for part one, I didn't think there were any gaps, but there was this one thing with the orcs. So the orcs do show up at the end to attack the company, and this was a little bit unexplained, I should say. In the original version of my edit. Obviously, we had Azog in the original movie, but that's completely gone. So in part one, that's really the only thing that, a new audience, who's never seen any of The Hobbit could watch this and think, oh, wow, this is a real movie, except for, like, those orcs. It's kind of out of the blue. And so that's, like, the one thing. So I tried my best to patch it up. Throughout the entire part here, there's tons of references to just evilness coming back. And we get this really good scene at the start. It's going to be about right around here, where they actually talk about orcs and orc packs, and they hear an orc pack, and so Bilbo even acknowledges this, and obviously we're following Bilbo. So that's perfect that we're learning about orcs here for the first time. There are orc packs out there, and then eventually an orc pack comes. Now, my original edit, it just happened. They showed up, but in this new version, I added one little piece of dialogue that might help smooth it out, because the problem is we don't really address the fact that the orcs are showing up. They just sort of show up. So to have Thorin or somebody, yell out that orcs are coming or it's an orc pack is perfect, and that pretty much can just sell it. And obviously it's not perfect. Ideally you'd have more dialogue or more of an explanation, but just given the footage we have, I think that's good enough. So what happens is they hear wargs like the original edit, and then they show up, and then when we get to here, we see Thorin actually go and kill one of these wargs, and he yells out in this new version that they're, warg scouts, and then it cuts, and he finishes his dialogue and says, an orc pack is not far behind. So I'll play it out for you, but just to preface, obviously it's never ideal to have dialogue that's kind of forced in, where it's like, recorded off screen, and it's not actually, you don't see his face talking, but I've seen plenty of real movies do this, and so I think in the rare case where you just really got to try to fix a plot issue, this is passable. So I don't know how choppy the playback's going to be or if the volume is fine, but basically this is how the dialogue plays out. Let's see. I'm going to disable color grading just to improve the performance, but yeah. Okay, see right there, yeah, it cut out because of my CPU. That's always annoying. Let me try that again. Let's do this. An orc pack is not far behind. Okay, so there we go. Let me just isolate that now. So
Scouts. An orc pack is not far behind.
That's all it is. He says warg scouts, and orc pack is not far behind. Now, of course, the ideal way to watch this is full surround sound with your loudspeakers, and you're in the moment watching the scene, and I think it's just about good enough. Now, it's not perfect, but I think that it's like, making a fan edit is always on a spectrum of, do you want to lean in towards focusing on your goal and having perfect technical quality, or do you want to maybe lean back on the technical quality and actually make sure that the plot and audience are all flowing or understanding everything? I don't even know what I was trying to say there, but making sure that the audience is understanding everything and that the plot is smooth. I think that I wanted to swing back a little bit in that direction for right here, because I never liked the fact that orcs showed up but they never like addressed them. So having that not only fixes that issue, but it also ties back in with the first scene where the audience already knows what an orc pack is, and so we hear that word or that phrase orc pack. So there we go. I think that that's all I need, and that's going to be the only change in part one. So yes, it is very minor. And just to finish up, there is of course this bit here where we then see an actual orc, which that's pretty good, and I added that very late into the project. But basically, I wanted to now actually show the orcs. It's kind of weird to just have them all in the background. You want to actually highlight them. So we have that shot, we have that shot, we have this shot, we have this shot, and then later there's I don't know where it is, but there's more shot. There's another shot of them. So I think that tidies up the whole orc pack thing. And then even at the start of part one, we see Thorin say, like orc pack again here. I don't remember what the dialogue is, but I think that's good enough to really sell the idea that there's just happens to be an orc pack out in the wild, and they're coming to attack us. Because that's what I have to do. I can't follow the book and say that these orcs are being sent, or these orcs are coming from the Goblin Caves to get revenge on the company, and they're going to taunt them in the trees. Like, that's just not what happens in the movie. So you kind of have to just make it up and say that this is a generic orc attack. Now that also starts to tie in with the next change. So then in part two, obviously at the end we get a huge battle with tons of orcs. So I want to keep reminding the audience about orcs. So this was in my original version, but there's this part where Baron says, their numbers are growing. He's talking about orcs a lot here. He says he hates orcs. And then we get to this scene. So this scene originally was cut completely short on my edit, but I've decided it could be interesting to extend it a bit. So in the original scene, it went on really long, and it was having Galadriel voiceover showing the Witch King of Angmar getting buried and all this stuff that we don't need to have. But it did have a few lines that actually could help my project. So obviously at the end of part two, we have that battle where there's orcs. So if we can set up that a little bit early, that would be really nice. And so what we can do is have this dialogue where Beorn introduces the fact that there are these Moria orcs and that their packs have been seen gathering, that he remembers a time when there used to be evil, and then he also mentions they talk very briefly about this necromancer, and it's all very mysterious. There's no direct references to Sauron. There's no like immediate Sauron music cue that is trying to shove it in the audience's face that this is a reference. It's just basically talking about evilness in this world, and it's only about 30 seconds, and I'm not going to play it out right now. I might post a test clip, but it's just going to take too long. Basically, well, let's see.
Sorcerer in Dol Guldur, you sure those packs have been seen gathering there? Each day more and more come.
Okay, so you get the idea. That's just kind of planting the seed that orcs are still important, even after part one, that little orc pack, they're still important. So that's gonna help to ease us into the battle very slightly. I mean, it's like such a minor thing, it doesn't do a whole lot. But the other big thing actually I would say is this does help with Gandalf's disappearance. So yes, it's like a very minor reference, and when you get to the battle, the audience might not even remember this, but at the very least, when we see Gandalf go here and then when he disappears, previously the audience just had to assume, oh, he's disappearing because there's some evilness. He sees this mark. What does this mark mean? He's going to go investigate that. That's all we knew. And it was pretty bare bones. That's like about as little as you can have for explaining Gandalf's disappearance. So now when we have this scene, just a couple minutes before he disappears, he's talking with Beorn about this necromancer, these orcs, evilness. And so you can kind of connect the dots that when you get to hear that, okay, well, he's going to go and investigate that. That's why all of a sudden he's leaving. So it helps with that. And then obviously when we get to the end, he comes back and is telling everyone that there's orcs. And so it's kind of this like plot line that just has a beginning, middle, and end, I guess you could say, except the middle is not shown on screen, funny enough. But yeah, I think that just makes sense to have a little bit more context to help explain Gandalf's disappearance. Now, I was really iffy about it because the mention of the necromancer, which just is completely random and no one's going to know what that means. However, it goes back to the book where they do mention this necromancer and don't provide any explanation about him. I mean, obviously in the book, it's like a little bit more welcoming to a clueless, uh, not audience, but reader. But I think it's good enough to keep in. So that's my next change. And we're getting kind of long in this video. I'm going to try to speed this up. But the next changes are all in the final battle. And I think these are the best ones. So if you stuck it around till now, this is, you're in for something cooler, I guess I could say. And this is definitely part of my favorite changes in the new update. So first off, we get to the start of the battle. I've decided to cut out all of the war chariots. Now, these were completely unnecessary to the movie. The only reason I included it was because kind of just leftover from the extended edition, and I was kind of worried about if the transition would be good enough without it. It would be kind of hard to edit around. And then I also just kind of convinced myself, well, it's more generic battling before we get into the sad montage of them losing. It doesn't hurt that much just to have some, good guys winning. And it also showed Azog as like a competent leader because he was giving out orders. But then I just changed my mind recently because honestly, it's one of the parts that sticks out in the battle because it's completely random that these chariots show up. We never saw them. It's not very Tolkien. It was also very random how gory it was with the blood. That was not in any of the other parts of the battle. And it just would help reduce runtime, which I've definitely crept up on. When I first made this edit, it was way shorter, and then my final release was like 4 hours. So anything to cut down a bit would be nice. And also this compensates perfectly for how I added in that scene. Remember, just I was talking about a minute ago, I added 30 seconds in and I cut 30 seconds out here, so it balances out perfectly. Now, in terms of the transition, it is kind of quick, but I'm using as much footage from both ends as possible, and I've done as much work with the audio as I can. There's like nothing you can really do. Basically, what I'm trying to say is this shot here when they're getting hit by arrows, I wish it, could linger on that for a couple or like literally one more second of just them dying, but there's nothing I can do. So it's good enough, I think. And my trick is always, if you can make the audio perfect, then the visuals, even if it cuts a little quick, at least the audio is fine. They don't hear something. That's my big thing because I can't control the video. I can't CGI a new shot, but I can at least do the audio. Okay, so now next part is we get to Bilbo running away. So this was a big critique of my edit, and I still stand by the fact that I like Bilbo running away. I don't really care. It's part of my project trying to follow the book. I understand that it's not seamless. I mean, if you leave it like the original movie, it's going to obviously be much smoother because that's how it was shot. But I do think it's a fun idea, especially trying to follow the book. So what I did at the end of my project when I was finishing it up was add this extra little sequence where we see everyone brutally fighting. We see Gandalf, he's occupied. Bilbo's trying to yell over to Gandalf. We see civilians, a woman brutally murdered. Actually, that's not a woman. That's just a guy with long hair. I don't actually know. I couldn't tell. Regardless, though, old man getting killed. So Gandalf is still occupied. So obviously Bilbo's going to run away. There's nothing he can do here. And then he goes here and he puts on his ring. And so in the original edit, then he proceeded to fully abandon ship and run out of the city. However, now in this version, he just stays here. So he puts his ring on. I don't know why the audio cut out, but there we go. So that's the transition. So it just kind of lingers on this for a second, and then we continue and resume on with the battle. So he has his ring on to hide, but that's all we see for now. We don't know what he's going to do, where he's going, and that just sort of breaks up his escape and gives it to the audience bit by bit. So we're not just jumping the gun and going full-blown, fully retreat right off the bat. We just slowly ease into it. We see him, okay, he's putting on the ring, he's taking a step back, and then we battle, we keep battling. Now we get to this sad montage where we have sad music and everyone's losing all of a sudden, and then we kind of just say, let's take a look. Remember, Bilbo, he has his ring on, he's kind of running around, he doesn't know what to do. And then we see this shot, they cannot hold the city. Okay, so things are pretty bad. Even the movie is telling us that we're losing just straight off the bat. And so then we cut back to here, and now he's still running around, and we kind of realize, okay, he's probably just running out of the city. And yes, and then we cut here. He's running away from Dale. And I think it finally makes it so he's earned his retreat. Not only was he surrounded by people being brutally slaughtered, but now the city is lost. It's overwhelmed. And everyone's dying. And we have sad music to trick us into thinking things are really bad. So that's what I have done with his retreat. So I think it flows a lot better. His face, just his acting kind of plays it off like he's just completely frightened and wants to get out of there. And it could make us even feel bad for him, honestly. Because before, when he retreated, it was just so sudden that, it didn't really make us feel sorry for Bilbo right away, just because it was kind of quick, I felt like. So anyways, that's that. And then now we take this huge break. We have talking, and then Thorin's coming back. And then now this is where we get back to new stuff. So now we have this montage of the good guys fighting and sort of winning again. They're rallying. But I wanted to bring back some more Gandalf sort of narrating the battle, because one of my later changes is going to have that where Gandalf is sort of just commentating on what's happening. So just to give a quick overview, he did that at the start quite a bit. Like he was, or at least observing the battle. There's that shot of him looking up at Azog, and then Azog was ordering his trolls, and then Gandalf was noticing that, and then Gandalf was saying, and then he's trying to cut us off. And so Gandalf was always sort of just, it's kind of like the audience in the battle. He's like watching things and understanding things. He's always the voice of reason. So I'm trying to beef up that role. Another example is like here we see him watching this. He's all surprised. And so we kind of, it's just a thing in the final battle that we see Gandalf's perspective. And so I just try to beef that up a bit by including this part where he says they're rallying to their king. So that was a very long explanation just for a minor thing, but I just ended up including this. And then, of course, there's a shot that goes with it of them rallying, and the soundtrack is perfectly fine because I just ended up replacing the middle chunk of footage, which used to have like, it's hard to explain, but basically, yeah, I didn't have to do as much work as you would think. What is all this? Okay. Because I basically replaced this chunk with the official audio, and then before and after was just already rescored, because in the original extended edition they didn't have music on this part. So it was pretty easy, but it was nice. It just sort of, it's a mixture of the theatrical and the extended edition, because in the theatrical edition this part did have music, and yeah, but whatever, that doesn't really matter. So point is, we see Gandalf sort of commentating a bit on the battle, and then we get to hear, and I mean, actually that's once again he's commentating. He's saying, we could maybe win this battle. And then now this is new. Okay, so we're gonna take a pause. Just remember the Gandalf stuff for later, but this is a completely separate change. So we get to here, and this is now where we take a little break from the battle and we go back to Bilbo. And the pacing, I think, is pretty good here, because we just had a sad part, then we had a happy part with tons of clashing and fighting, and now we need kind of just a quiet part for a second, let the audience breathe, so the music stops, and then we sort of see Bilbo walking around with no music, and it's a nice little pause. But the problem was, when we saw Bilbo up here hiding in Ravenhill, he was just walking around aimlessly without his ring on. But remember, the last time we saw him, he had his ring on. So what do? I've decided to take a different shot, and then I've also edited it so that we see him actually take the ring off. So I'm going to go through this frame by frame. Sorry if the audio is annoying. I have it set to play the audio even on skipping frames, which is annoying. But we have him up here. So it's only a couple frames, and it's not perfect, but no one's gonna ever watch this frame by frame in a real setting to notice any imperfections with the VFX, but you get the idea. So he just appears, and then there's also this thing where his arm is slowly lowering, because obviously he had the ring on his left hand from earlier, if you remember. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So he takes his ring off, and that fixes continuity. He shouldn't we shouldn't see that off screen, because that kind of sucks. And then I have the audio to tidy that up with just the ring sound effect, and then we take it from elsewhere in the movie. Then we see him pull out his sword, which is also fixing continuity because he had his sword out. And then we have a bunch of just breathing and sound effects of stepping on the ground, because fun fact, this entire scene was covered with a huge loud soundtrack. So I've had to fully redo the audio for this entire, whatever, 8-second, 10-second shot. So that's what all of this is. You got the wind ambience. And so this acting here was originally actually Bilbo being stunned at watching Feely die, but now I think it plays off actually pretty well as him being just utterly confused and like kind of shocked from just battling. It's, you know, he's not really meant to be in a battle, so he's a bit scared. And he just kind of looks confused. He doesn't really know what he's doing. So I think that actually that acting plays even better than the original shot, which is, if I delete this, this was the original one where he does look a little confused, but not quite as much. So that's my next change, to just fix continuity, because Bilbo shouldn't just, magically take his ring off screen. We should see that happen. And then of course I did have to actually do some color grading, very subtle, but just kind of make this a little bit more blue and green rather than as red as it was, just to match it with this. So there we go, that's that. And now this is the last bit of changes. Okay, we're going to end off here. I don't know if anyone's still watching by this point in the video, but if you are, you're a real one. So we get to here, and this is our music montage, and it's never going to be perfect. I just stick by the fact that I don't want to have these silly goats or whatever they are riding up to Ravenhill. I don't like the consistency, just randomly animals appear out of nowhere. I don't like the fact that it's not Tolkien really at all to have those there. And so the best thing I can do is just kind of do a music montage, just throw some music on in the background and cut through a bunch of shots quickly, and then hope, the audience buys it. So what I decided to do to help that is introduce some shots of Gandalf narrating what's happening. So now what we see is, there's a couple new changes at the start. So Thorin is watching up here. He's like, we need to go up there, kill the leader. So I included a few more frames here to show him actually moving off frame. So he's like leaving. Then we cut to Azog. Audience is like, okay, so we got to kill this guy. And then we see Gandalf, our best friend over here. He's coming back. Just like throughout this edit, he's been commentating on the battle. So this is not completely out of the blue. We see him running up, and he's looking. What is he looking at? And then we see Dane looking. What is Dane looking at? He's talking. And then we see, oh, okay, let's take a break. Some battling. And then Gandalf is still looking, and he's putting together the pieces, and he's saying, he's taking his best warriors, sort of just commentating on what's happening. And then we cut up real close to Azog, and then boom, we're there. Pretty sudden, but it's decent, I think. We're fighting here, and then we cut back to Gandalf, who then drops the punchline before the music goes real loud.
To cut the head off the snake.
And that audio doesn't make sense if you haven't seen the shot before, but he basically says he's taking his best warriors, and then we see fighting for a few seconds, and then we cut back and he says to cut the head off the snake. So that's the full line of dialogue, and then we enjoy the music for a bit, and then we continue. So that is the new music montage. So I think it works a little bit better to have that Gandalf dialogue. Still not perfect, but I think it allows me to achieve my goal a bit better. And then throughout the edit, the rest of it, no other changes. I guess, to be fair, I did do a few small trims to shorten it. So there's actually only like 2. After the dwarfs charge out, I made 2 trims to just remove some redundant battling and shorten it by like 15 seconds. But that just helps with the runtime. So then we get to the end of the runtime is 4 hours, 17 minutes, 25 seconds. That includes credits and intermission. So if you remove both of those, it's only about 4 hours, but the runtime net change is we actually lost 23 seconds, basically 24 seconds actually. So that's great. So even though I just went over all these changes and additions, I actually ended up cutting the runtime down more than my previous release of this edit. So it was a huge pet peeve of mine that I kept thinking of new cool ideas, and then climbing up that runtime. I'm not going to go longer than what it is already now. Like, this is the hard limit, because we're at the same length as Return of the King, so we can't go any longer than that. Or I don't know, if maybe the Return of the King is a couple minutes longer, but point is we're basically at that range, and so we can't go any longer. So that's really it. So if you watched this, I'm curious to know what you think. If you didn't watch this, I'm probably going to release this anyways, because I think these changes make sense. But that's gonna be it. So yeah, thanks for watching.